What's going on, y'all? Hey,
Hi.
Mandy.
Hey,
How you
Kevin.
doing?
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I feel like I haven't seen you in a minute, actually in person, even though we're in the same city. So it's kind of cool seeing you here. We had to do a webinar just to meet up.
I know. So, for those unfamiliar, Kevin and I are childhood friends. And not only did we attend the McCombs School together, also grew up together in DeSoto, Texas. So, have known
Yeah,
each other since elementary school. So,
yeah.
lifelong long friends. And then after McCombs, went to Harvard, although it's separate times. So, it is good to see you, Kevin.
It's
I
good to
think the
see
last
you.
time we saw each other was the Texas Tech game. We got together in the backyard.
Yes, yes, it was. And was that a good game for us? I can't
We did.
remember
We
that.
won.
That was a good game. Sometimes the happy moments are kind of fleeting, but it's so good to be here today with you. And like Mandy said, like we go way back, and it's just to be actually here today to be able to share our experience now as adults and entrepreneurship. Like I never thought that we'd be doing that way back in DeSoto when I was chasing you down the hall with your Jerry curl. So I had to say that. Okay, so let me kick off and say this. So Mandy is my friend, but I'm also one of Mandy's biggest fans, and I have been for years now because she's just so great. And so I've got a couple things, like about her background that I want to share first about you. So Mandy went off to law school over at Harvard, and she practiced law for 12 years. I did not know that it had been 12 years. That 12 years seems like five. It just time is flying by. But you worked there for 12 years before you decided to take the leap and to start Kanarys, which is a data-driven platform that basically tries to create a much more diverse and equitable workplace where every employee feels that they belong. The company was founded in 2018, and they started out with just two people, and now you've got over 20 people working for you with interns and people around the world you're just working with to create this, with a robust board of advisors and Fortune 500 customers. One of the things that I think is most interesting about you, Mandy, is that you have raised over $1.6 million. And to the people on this call, you're like, okay, that's a lot of money, but what makes it super significant? Well, that puts Mandy and also her co-founder Star, who also is a Longhorn, in a very special group. There are less than 50 Black women who have actually raised over $1 million. Like that right there deserves like a huge applause, Mandy. I'm so proud of you for doing that. I know that that was not easy, and I'd love for you to kind of unpack that during this webinar. And recently, I just found this out too, is that Mandy and Star were both named, y'all, by Entrepreneur Magazine as the 100 most powerful women of 2020. And they were recently featured on GMA for all of the work that they're doing. So Mandy, congrats to you as a friend. Congrats as an alum. Thank you for being the best of what Texas represents and offers to the world.
Well, thank you, Kevin, so much for that introduction. I would like to also provide some background. Like you said, I know we know each other really well. And so I know all about your great success and has been following you over the years. But for some of the individuals not familiar with your background, I'd love to tell folks a little bit more about Fit Man Cook and the fabulous community that you've created. So Kevin is the founder of Fit Man Cook, an online community that inspires men and women to eat healthy and stay fit with healthy recipes. That, in Kevin's words, I'm sure you guys have already seen, are not boring. He has over 2 million followers around the world and has become one of today's most sought after personalities in nutrition, health, and wellness. He has a huge social media following, one of the top on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And he's garnered more than 7,000 five-star reviews on the Apple App Store. Kevin has also released several cookbooks. In 2018, he released his first cookbook, which reached the top of Amazon's fitness category within a month. And he launched Fit Man Cook in 2012 and has already been featured in Forbes, Men's Health, Self, Shape Magazine, as well as many national TV appearances, Live with Kelly and Ryan, The Rachel Ray, Today, Good Morning America, and many others. So Kevin, without further ado, let's dive right in.
Okay. All right. So I want to start out with this question first. I think it'd be really interesting. You have this amazing career as an attorney, your partner at your firm. Why would you leave?
So I think, like most entrepreneurs, I'm driven by my passion, right? And
Yeah.
I know you're going to tell your story as well. But even when I look back to kind of what started my journey actually started at UT Austin. When we were on campus, during the time we were there were many racial incidences that happened. And one to you in particular, and I'm sure you'll maybe we'll go through that and talk about it in a little bit more detail. But the president of the university at the time was President Faulkner, and appointed a racial respect and fairness committee. And so I was one of the 4 student representatives to that committee. And that committee ultimately led the recommendation of creating the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. So although jumping from law, where I was representing private equity firms and was often the only woman or person of color in the room, seemed like a jump, but I've always been passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion issues. And during the course of my career practicing law, I was always involved in that. So within my law firm, I was on the diversity committee, the hiring committee, the women's task force, involved with the Black ERG group for our office and leading that up. And so I always was very connected to these issues. And I felt that the way organizations were approaching it, although well-intentioned, wasn't having the impact. What we see most organizations is doing celebrations and events like Black History Month or celebrating Pride Month, which is important, but really doesn't get to the systemic issue of how do we make the workplace more equitable and fair and inclusive. And so I wanted to take my learnings as far as being obsessed with data and research and really apply that so that organizations could start to approach these issues with that business-based perspective and that research and data-based approach.
Was there anything in particular at your job that kind of led you to go and do this? Because I remember those times at Texas, and you were quite involved in that. And one thing you did leave this one out. You remember Texas Heat, and Texas Heat, for you all that don't know, Mandy saw a need really early on that everybody was always, supporting all, like the football, the basketball, the men's sports. And Mandy said, we need to share love to everybody. So she created Texas Heat, which was primarily focused on the women's sports. And I think also swimming, was that also for men's swimming? Because that wasn't something. But anyway, so I think early on, like you saw this need about the fairness even of the way that we cheer and we celebrate each other. So what was it at your job that said, okay, I've got this high paying job. I'm creating value for my customers and for my clients, but I'm being pulled this way over here, something in the nonprofit space. What was that for you? Or were there several things?
Yeah. So I had a lot of experiences that many women and people of color and other underrepresented groups face in the workplace. So although I have my share of stories and we can delve into some of them, my stories aren't unique. And I think what got me was over time and after practicing so long, I felt that I started to normalize behavior that shouldn't be normal. And so nothing would faze me, right? Like things would happen and I wouldn't talk to anyone about them. I know this story. I had gotten asked if I'd gotten to Harvard legitimately in the workplace before. I've had many other things like that happen. And I started to just chalk it up as this is just what it's like to be in the corporate world.
Yeah.
You just have to deal with this. And this is just what you deal with if you're a woman of color. And then I think as I started to have my children and different things, I didn't want them to enter into that same work environment. I felt like I was very equipped to teach them the skills and the survival skills that we all learn in order to ascend the ranks, so that I felt like I was very well equipped to teach them how to navigate these spaces. But I was like, I don't want to teach them that. I want the systems themselves to be better. And so that was one of the things that really led to the creation. And luckily, one of our other co-founders is my husband, who's also a UT grad. And so in the beginning, it was difficult, right, to make that jump, because at the time we had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old and saying, hey, we're going to quit our jobs and do this business. And he's like, what are you talking about? But,
Right.
He's also very committed and focused on these issues. And so he leaned all in. And so both of us have been doing this for the past 2.5 years and love it and couldn't imagine doing anything else. But Kevin, I think this is a great time to kind of pivot too, to tell some of your story and your, journey into entrepreneurship, because you too were in the corporate space for a while.
Right.
And so love to hear kind of what led you to also come onto the entrepreneurship journey.
Right. I think that Mandy touched on something that, that's really important here is, was the microaggressions that, that people of color face, women face daily in the corporate environment. And this is a really true story that I can remember now, since Mandy just mentioned that. But my very first job from college was with KPMG, and my manager there at the time, he was a Black man. And that was like unique because he was like the only person like in the company like in Dallas. And he took me out to lunch on my first day. And he said something to me that I have never forgotten to this day. And it made me so angry. But the reality is, over time, it proved to be true. He said this, and I quote word for word. He said, Kevin, Black people can do really well at this company, but we get in trouble whenever we think that things should be fair. And that made me so mad. Just because like Mandy said, they should be fair, and and why aren't they fair? And the way that things began to unfold for me at the job, I realized more and more, if I just kind of accept that this is the reality that I have to just live in, a really, sometimes macro and micro like aggressive environment, the more I try to fight against that, the more unhappy I am. But if I just accept things as the way that they are, I'll be okay, which is a really sad reality for a lot of Black people. For a lot of POC, for a lot of LGBTQ, members, for a lot of women. It's just that if we just accept things as they are, then you'll be okay. Stop trying to make it seem as if things should be fair and normal. And so that set inside of me, just like literally from my first job, is I told myself, you can't stay here long. So when Fit Men Cook, it was less about racial justice and inequity. It was much more about how I felt about Kevin. I was at a place where I was pretty unhappy. I had survived, gotten through the hump of the 2008 recession, and I'd gone off to grad school. And right when I graduated, the stock market just went crazy. Of course, and I found myself back home in DeSoto with my parents on their couch trying to figure out life. With that came depression like I've never seen before. And I just began to eat and just cope through food. And I began to gain weight and drink a whole lot quietly. Didn't really share that out with my close friends. And I was just in a really unhappy place. Now, I ended up feeling a little bit better. I saw a therapist. I got on, some medication, and I began to work. I got a great job over at Dell, and I just began to kind of rebuild a little bit, just little by little. But at the same time, I was getting into health and wellness. And what I discovered about health and wellness is that the more I ate better and the healthier decisions that I made, I didn't have to rely on that medication so much. So it was kind of like a therapy for me. And Fit Man Cook, it didn't start out what it is today. It started out basically as a side hustle. I was still pretty broke at the time. And I didn't have enough money to pay trainers to help me out. So I got really indignant because I went to this guy and he was going to charge me almost $1,000 for 1 month of training. But he was one of those Instagram models that everybody just wanted to look like. I wanted to look like. And I was thinking you know what, Kev? You went to a wonderful high school. You went to a fantastic college and you have a graduate school degree. Why can't you figure this out? Literally, that's what I told myself. I was indignant. So I marched myself over to Half Price Books, bought every book they had there about nutrition, and just began to research the content and just to understand what's a calorie and macro and nutrient. And now here was my side hustle, right? So I said, all right, Kev, people are using this social media thing to blog. What if you can post every single meal that you're eating out there on the internet and get feedback. It was a way for me to crowdsource my diet. So long story short, I began to do that. I didn't realize there are people out there who were just like me, who were searching for something different. So people just began to follow me. They got connected to my story. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting up there in Dell meetings, halfway listening, like, oh, absolutely, I can do that. And also answering blog questions. And I went from being a super stellar employee at Dell to, I say now, probably being Dell's most like mediocre employee, just because the passion had just taken over. And anyone who's an entrepreneur knows about that passion. You just can't really hide it. So I had to make the decision. I said, hey, I don't want to be mediocre. And I also want to kind of bet on myself. So let me go ahead and explore this right here. And one of my main criticisms, I remember this vividly from my like performance review. And my boss was talking to me and Dale, and he said, you know, Kev, I feel like that kind of spark is lost that you had before. And I said, here's what it is. I don't feel connected to the value that I'm creating in the world. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm doing all this stuff and I don't see any benefits of it. Michael Dell does, I guess, or maybe other people in between there. I don't really feel that. So I don't know. And with blogging, this is what I got. I could post a recipe or an idea. And literally, I remember the first time this happened, I posted a recipe in the morning time. And about 2 hours later, I got an email from someone in Sweden. And they said, I just made this for dinner. It was so good. Thanks so much. And I'm like, I'm helping people in Sweden. So that's what it was for me. It was a time, you know, for me to go ahead and like bet on myself. Now, Mandy, for you, I want you to kind of maybe give some context because I want to talk about some of the challenges that I've had, but I want you to give people context around this. Less than 50 Black women raising more than $1 million. When I talk to my other friends who have other startups and they're raising millions of dollars, they make it seem as if it's just so easy. So when I heard that stat from you, it floored me. What kind of challenges have you faced raising money, and why is it so hard for actually businesses that are Black owned and female centric to get so much money?
Yeah, no, great question, Kevin. And I just want to chime in on one thing that you said when you talked about the passion and talked about getting the responses, because it just reminded me of, you know, the way we're helping companies with these issues. And I can't tell you how many people have contacted me on my social media channels when we work with a company to say, I just found out my company's working with you. I'm so excited. I hope that there's going to be change within this organization. And sorry, I want to get choked up. It brings tears to my eyes because people feel like there's going to be change, right? And that we're going to be able to advocate for them. So when you talk about the discrepancies and the disparities that we see in funding, right? It's some of the same, you know, institutional barriers that we are combating in our work, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the things that we see in corporate America are based off the way the structures are set up. Like I said, I feel that most organizations are well-intentioned. They want their workplaces to be fair. But we know that we can set up this way the systems work can perpetuate these inequities, right? And they exist in every facet of our society. So when we look at the venture capital model, right, it's based off of warm introductions. That's the way it works. They don't have emails that they display. They don't say, submit your pitch decks here. It's warm introductions. And so when you look at that community, right, that's primarily based in San Francisco and, you know, Silicon Valley, that area. And when you look at the demographics, most of the venture capitalists all come from Stanford or Harvard, right? Yeah. And so I think, you know, you talked about Star and I are two of the 50 Black women that have been able to raise over $1 million. I definitely think that Harvard connection had something to do with it, where we were able to navigate those networks. So when you look at that, and, you know, when we look at women, right? Women overall, not women of color, women only receive 2% of venture capital funding. And then when we look at women of color receive 0.06%.
Oh my gosh.
It's very, very small. And then we know that, again, the way the structures are set up, but it's also through a lot of the research, we've shown that women and people of color are asked different questions. In particular, a lot of the research has been around gender. And so women are asked more prevention-based questions. Those are questions about risk, How are you going to navigate these different challenges that all businesses have? Where men are asked more promotion-based questions as far as market opportunity and, the growth of their company. And so, with any conversation, if it's more risk-based and talking about potential challenges, it's going to carry a different tone and feeling when you leave the meeting than those promotion-based questions. So I think all of those things go into it. There's been a heightened awareness of some of the systemic inequities that exist within our country, in corporate America, the criminal justice system. Those same discussions are being had right now within the venture capital community, and saying we got to do things differently, right?
Yes.
We know that talent doesn't exist within just one geographic region, one race, one gender. And so if only one community is being funded, what's the issue? Because not only are we missing out on great companies to invest in, we know that certain communities, right, entrepreneurs are driven by their passion or challenges that they see, that also means that issues within various communities also aren't being solved. So it's a really big trickle down effect as well. So Kevin, go ahead.
Well, hold on, because I want to still dig into this a little bit. So with that, with what you're trying to create, because you got really emotional talking about the work that you're doing, like with Kanarys, I think that's really beautiful. And I want people to actually see that and feel that passion and feel that energy, that to know that first off, that a lot of entrepreneurs, what we birth comes from a place of passion. It means something to us, and it hurts us whenever we can't really fulfill that. Do you think that your trajectory as an attorney would be different if there was a Kanarys back then, 12 years ago, for you? What would that look like? So what are you building with Kanarys that could perhaps persuade that Mandy Price, who is currently at a law firm, to stay where she is, to build like where she is?
I hear you. That's an interesting question. I do believe that everything in our life lines itself up to place us in the position that we're in. So I don't think Kanarys would exist if I hadn't had the challenges that I had. But I think what we're trying to accomplish with Kanarys, right, is so that we see organizations approach these issues differently. Some of the same disparities that we just talked about within venture capital funding for women and for people of color are the same disparities we see within the law firm community, right?
Wow.
When we look at kind of the entry-level classes of women within law firms or law schools, it's roughly 51% as far as graduating from law school. 51% magna cum laude or editors of their law review, right? All the things that we consider as markers of success. And same thing, when we look at most entry-level classes of law firms, it's that same 51%. But then when we look at who is ascending to partnership at the law firms, we start seeing vastly different numbers. We start seeing, if we're lucky, 18% of women. And so I think what we are trying to accomplish at Kanarys is, well, why is that? The women didn't just start becoming less talented, right? If there were 51% that were in the entry-level class and that were magna cum laude, why is it that only 18% ascended to partnership?
Is it?
And it's not kind of the old theories of, well, women just want to have babies and leave the workforce. I don't know anyone in my law school class that said, I just want to have babies and leave, because we've worked so hard, right? You work for 10 plus years before you're able to become a partner. And so I think people are starting to say, what is it about the structures themselves that don't allow the talent to kind of rise to the top?
Right. That's a really good question. And that's something that your company is trying to tackle right now, for so many people, and just giving hope in that. It reminds me of my time within corporate America, where I felt hopeless. And this is a story I shared this summer with everything that's happened with like COVID. One of the, I don't want to call it a good thing, but a consequence of the shelter in place is that so many things happened. So where people were trapped inside, so we couldn't look away anymore. So we saw all these things. And I think that's why some of the momentum happened with the racial justice movement, because we could see things and you had nowhere to go. You couldn't go outside anymore. You're just watching your TV, you're watching your phone. And for the first time for some people, they're seeing this. one of the stories that I shared with my followers during this time, and it reminded me of the work that you're doing, was a really significant time when I was working in this consulting firm. And I went to this meeting and I was given the reports out. We go around the round table and everyone gives their reports. And whenever I would say something, my colleague would say, "For shizzle my nizzle, for shizzle my nizzle," whenever I would start talking. And it's one of those microaggressions that I think a lot of Black people and maybe another POC kind of see, like you always it's gotta be a rap song. It's gotta be this. And I'm just so used to it. So I would just like ignore it. Around the third time she said it, I was like, okay, first off that I can't even address this publicly because as a Black man confronting somebody, confronting a woman publicly is not going to be a good thing. Also, I want to always assume the best intentions from people. So I pulled her aside after the meeting at the water cooler by ourselves. And I said, "Hey, do you know what for shizzle my nizzle means?" And she's like, "Oh, it's from some rap song, my Snoop Dogg." I was like, "Yeah, do you know what that means?" And so I explained to her that the nizzle meant the N-word. So every time you were saying that to me, you were like, "What's up, my N-word?" And that was awkward and also inappropriate. And why didn't you say that when our other colleague who's white was giving their report? And you said that to me. So she said that she didn't know. And I said, "Okay, got it." Forgave her. I moved on. I didn't bring it up to anybody else. I didn't talk to anybody because it's squashed. Fast forward, the next day, we had a large thing happen in our company, and it's all hands on deck, and everybody is inside this large conference room working frivolously. We're all like doing our stuff, and the partner comes in, a white man, and he says, "Hey, so-and-so, did you tell Kevin what I said?" And I'm sitting there typing away. I'm looked up from my computer. I'm like, "What?" And he says, "She told me that you had a problem with her saying nizzle. I told her that she can say it. I don't have a problem with that at all." And it just got silent in the room because my partner at my firm just gave everybody in the room permission to call me the N-word at their disposal whenever they wanted to, because he was okay with that. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those times, Mandy, where I felt so powerless. I didn't go to HR because I was afraid that I would not be believed. I didn't go to my other colleagues because nobody said anything in that moment. And I for darn sure didn't go to the person that I had initially talked about saying that that was offensive, because it was already shown that she could not be trusted. So I did what so many other Black people and people of color do in the workplace. I swallowed it and I kept on working. And I put my head down and I remember that moment. I remember my fingers were shaking like this as I was trying not to react. And I was literally biting back tears. So thank you for the work that you're doing, because I think at Kanarys at that time, it would have allowed me to have that outlet to go and express that in an anonymous way, but also a really formal way, because that stuff has to be addressed. Oftentimes, I felt kind of forced out to be an entrepreneur because I don't see myself growing in this environment. I don't see myself growing in this hostility. I don't see myself fighting every single day, putting up with this. Why do I have to do that? I've been in school all this time. I got hazed by BHP classes. Why do I need to do this again? I got hazed in graduate school, those classes. Now I've got to be hazed here too about something as dumb that's not even connected to the value that I'm producing for the company. So I just want to thank you for what you do, because I know that I would have benefited from something like a Kanarys.
Well, Kevin, thank you. And I just want to, they told us on the call, I don't want to minimize what you're saying, but CHBPH now. You remember? It's Canfield. Let me correct you.
Canfield. It's Canfield BHP. Thank you, Mr. Canfield. We appreciate you and what you're doing for the McCombs School.
But Kevin, you're so spot on. And, that's the crux of what we're doing. But I don't want to just keep framing it within Kanarys, but we create those feedback mechanisms so people have a way to communicate this anonymously. But I think what you hit on is what we see, right? We see people of color going into entrepreneurship at, you know, astronomical rates. Black women is actually the fastest growing group. And when we look at it, they say, you know, it's passion, right?
Yeah.
But one of the top categories is they feel like there's no place for them in corporate America. And I think the fact that that's even one of the top reasons shows us of how much work there is to do. But I'd love for you to talk too, you know, about some of the inroads you've made using your platform. You know, you have not only advocated for wellness and mental health and, you know, but also you've advocated for equity and inclusion on your platform as well. And we know that your space within influencers, especially within the food space, is not very diverse. So love to have you talk more about that as well.
Yeah, you know, my rise, I think that, you know, like my success has been a little bit different in that I didn't notice it. I didn't notice the inequity like right away because I didn't start to work with companies right away. And I think I really noticed the inequities once they were revealed to me. And I'll tell you how it was revealed to me. And, you know, like one of those ways. But I'm in a space in health and wellness that is largely dominated by white people, but also in food dominated by white women. Cool, nothing wrong with that. I'm gonna go and do my thing. So I think part of the attraction to me was, here I come, this male that's in this dominated female space doing this. Plus, I'm Black. And as I've been told by so many other brand partners, which if people are watching this call, just so you know, in case you haven't heard this yet from anyone that you know in your life, but and Mandy's already laughing because she knows where I'm going with this. He's so well spoken. He's just so spot on and just great. That's not necessarily a compliment that I wanted to hear, but when people begin to say that to me, I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. What do you think about the recipe though? What do you think about what I'm sharing out to people? What do you think about my energy? So I think that was a little bit, of something that I had to get used to. But again, I came from corporate America, so I'm used to that, but I just didn't expect that. And so I think as an entrepreneur, I thought going off on my own, I could just jump over a lot of those hurdles that I thought that I saw within corporate America, but those same hurdles are here. I have so many examples behind the scenes, and just because I was raised this way and because it's my own personal philosophy, I like to keep certain things out of the mainstream. So there are a lot of incidents that happen behind the scenes that I don't really share with my followers because I don't think that's really professional. But I'll share this here in the webinar with y'all. One of the first times where I saw that there was like inequity was one of my first national campaigns, and this company had requested to work with me. They hopped on a Skype call and they wanted to interview me, and I was talking to them. They wanted me to do a quick video. I sent them a quick video and they liked it. It was like, oh my God, he's great energy, blah, blah, blah. We love this about you and we've seen this. And by this time too, I was also doing a lot of local TV, hadn't really hit the national stuff just yet, but I had done several things in front of the camera, which I'm so thankful for because it gave me that opportunity to really practice. So I was ready for this opportunity. So they're like, you were hired, we're going to run with you. And they came back about a week or so before we're about to film. I was going to fly up to New York. They hit me with the company wanted to balance everything out. So we're going to add another personality. And I'm laughing already because that's what I did when I got the email. I was like, oh, balancing out. Well, that's definitely a new one I haven't heard before. We're going to balance it out. What do you mean balance it out? Oh, it's already balanced. You just needed the one person. So they wanted to add another person. So I said, okay, I'm pretty sure the person is probably a female and they're probably white. And yes, that was true. They wanted to add somebody else just for security. Literally, this is what they're telling me. So it's like, that's really interesting. So when we got together to film, this person, this young lady, didn't have much experience in front of the camera, purportedly. And I actually, obviously, so she delayed filming so long, like big time. We were hours behind schedule because she wasn't able to function, right? And the producers were talking really, really poorly about her. So one quick thing that I felt to mention was that when they asked me my rate, I said, I've never done this before. I don't have a manager, whatnot. So tell me what it is. They said, oh, it's based off of your social media and your reach. So it's going to be this. I said, okay, cool, fine. I did it. So when she was on set, on camera, and not doing so well, she didn't have the best experience. She looked pretty sad about it. So afterwards, whenever she finally finished up, I said, hey, congrats on finishing. I know this was super stressful. And she's like, yeah, I couldn't pass up, like this money. And when she said this money, she mentioned the same amount of money that I got paid. I was like, cool. And something told me inside said, don't Google it. Don't Google her stuff. And I said, let me pull out my phone real quick and Google her. So I Googled her. It was like, Mandy, it was less than 25% of my following. She had no significant experience. She didn't have a manager at all. She was she was just a young lady that did recipes and whatnot. So I'm like, how in the world did she get paid the exact same thing to me? Now, a lot of people will say, well, Kevin, maybe she's just a good bargainer. Well, here's what I've seen throughout the years. I've seen that consistently. I get paid the same thing that female bloggers perhaps will get paid, or another blogger will get paid that's white, that has literally a fraction of my following. We get paid the exact same thing. We get paid the exact same thing. And if it's truly based off of your influence and your reach, there's something to be said about that. So that was one of the big things for me that I had to kind of swallow, that like, Kevin, even as an entrepreneur, you're still going to have these different hurdles, and you can't let it derail you. You can't let that influence like your passion for it. You just need to grind, not harder, continue to grind, but don't really focus on that. I don't know how to remedy that in terms of getting equal pay. One thing that I have done though is that it matters who I've had around me, Mandy, right? So my manager, he's a white man from Minnesota, and he, as working with me now after 5 years or so, he's picking up on these patterns because he represents other people, and he sees it without me having to say something. And I remember one of the times he said something to me, and it was so good, and I was so proud to have him represent me. He said, hey, Kevin, this company reached out and they wanted to work with you, but Kevin, I looked to their website and they didn't have one person of color on there. And I'm just starting to think, are they trying to get you to be a token? I want to reach out to them and find out what their commitment is to having other people of color on their platform. And I was like, there you go. Wow. And that's what we're doing. And that's what I've continued to do behind the scenes of my platform, to make sure that a lot of these companies who are, especially now in this 2020 climate, are purportedly authentically reaching out to become a lot more diverse, to make sure that this is for the long haul and not for a great social media post, not just for 2020, that it's ongoing.
So Kevin, you said so much there.
Sorry.
No, it was great. It was so great because, I think you talked about some of the challenges that, you had in corporate America, and then you're seeing some of those same challenges in entrepreneur. I said the same, right? Some of the same disparities and equities that we saw, we're also confronting in this, in this portion of our life as well. When you talked about the pay disparities, and I know we've talked about this before, and it's not something that, like you said, you're just experiencing. There's other bloggers, right, and influencers that also have, commented on how the pay is not fair, and those same disparities exist within corporate America, right? When we see the pay parity discrepancies amongst women of color. I believe October 18th was Latino Fair Pay Day. So it took all the way till October for Latinos to get paid the fair wage as far as their counterparts. So there's so much work to be done in this area. And so I'm glad that you spoke on that. I know that we're running. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, well, and say that one more time, just that, like, this, I know I'm talking about me, but there are now studies, because of what's been going on, that they actually started that during this year to look at the pay disparities between Black influencers versus the white influencers, and it's pretty significant, about 10 to 30%, like to what they're getting paid. And so I think that for me, again, I had to not get my feelings so hurt, because you think as an entrepreneur that you get to control everything, but that narrative still exists even in entrepreneurship.
So
I know that you're going to go to some.
Well, I'm going to try to go to some of the questions, because I know that we I think said we would use the last 15 minutes for some questions, and so I think we can weave some of the questions into some of the things we've been highlighting. One of the things that we know is really important during the pandemic, and one of the things I think both of our kind of platforms have championed, you with respect for people coming in and understanding about self-improvement and wellness and mental well-being, and then me as far as advocating with companies. How do you support your employees during this time? How do you ensure that you're providing those resources, those support? Because we are in uncharted times, and one of the things that I always tell people is stop acting like it's normal. That's the first step, is let's not act like this is all normal. But I would love for you to talk about,
and wear a mask.
Love for you to talk about some of the things that, why this wellness and mental health and self-improvement is so important. But then also both of us to chime in and talk about, as you are building, a company, why it's important for an entrepreneur as well to have that mental well-being. A lot of times when you're starting a business, you're head down, you're super focused, and it can be isolating. And I don't think a lot of people understand those late nights and those sleepless nights that most entrepreneurs go through. So love for you to, hit that question, and then I'll go through and talk about some of the things I've done to help build my kind of community to help in this realm as well.
Right. I'll try to be as succinct as possible with this so we can get to more questions. I've always felt at my best whenever I feel well rested and I feel good with the stuff that I have eaten. The highest level of serotonin, which actually gives us our little mood boost and whatnot, is found in our guts. So whenever we feed ourselves good things, it actually affects our mood. I feel like oftentimes with entrepreneurs, especially in the social media space, we're all a part of the I'm going to work I'm going to sleep whenever I'm dead type of mentality. We're going to grind all day, and that's glorified. But really, all we're doing is just creating a bank of more mental health and wellness issues, health issues down the road, with our bodies, and probably even severed relationships too, like along the way, because there's so much that goes into that. So what I try to get entrepreneurs and business people to see, because we work with some companies now, is that stop looking at your health and wellness as something that's like the icing on the cake, and look at your health and wellness as it's like actually in the batter. And so look at it as like, hey, the better I feel, the more I exercise, the more effective I can be at my job, the more powerful I can be, the more like creative I can be. And that's the message that we drive home to people. And we see that time and time again. One of the cool things about, not cool things, but one of the consequences of this pandemic that's actually has been positive, I feel like, in some regard, is that people had to figure out ways to be active in home. So they're doing a lot more home workouts, the Peloton bike and other like online platforms that people are doing. And we're reading these stories and seeing how people are actually really feeling better. And you're like, whoa, this is great. I haven't worked out this much ever. And and all of a sudden, when you do that, that job that you hated going to, you're actually looking forward to. You're like, I can't wait to get into the work today. I can't wait to log on today. So it behooves you to do those things.
Well, I wish I could say that I was using my Peloton bike more than ever. I started out in the beginning using it, and now it just stares over there at me. And I saw that Beyonce has now released her music on there. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to, get back on there. But I have not done that. But I did want to talk about the importance of having those mental health breaks, that outlet, that community, right? And that's something that I think all of us have struggled with, because we have not been able to visit our friends and family as we usually have. And so, one of the things that, I definitely fell in that trap that you talked about, where I'm grind all day. I get here in this desk, and sometimes it starts at 7, 8 in the morning, and I'll be here until 9 o'clock at night. And so what I've tried to really start doing and leaning on is having a community with other entrepreneurs. I think sometimes the entrepreneur journey is so lonely that if you're not an entrepreneur, you don't really know what it's like. I remember when you first were starting, how people were telling you, oh, Kevin, you left your job. You have so much time now to do whatever you want. And you were laughing about that. And I didn't really get it until I became an entrepreneur. And you said, you see now, Mandy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have less time. You have less time. And one of the great things that came out of Kanarys was in the Google Accelerator for Black Founders.
Yeah.
And one of the great things that came out of that was that community. Being able to talk with other Black founders about the challenges that Black founders have, being able to just connect with other founders that were building companies and trying to figure out how to support their employees, right, during this time as well. And so I would encourage everyone, right, because we very much had the mentality of we're building. We don't have time for some of these meetups or accelerators, that you have to have that community. And so I think it's instrumental for everyone to be connected and plugged in so that they can get that support.
Mandy, I have a question for you. This is from the chat. People are watching and it looks like they're really enjoying. This is a question, a comment from Major Thomas, and I'm probably not going to get it characterized correctly. So he was saying, basically, I think that he's saying, if one person is getting X and another person accepts X minus this, is transparency, the actual answer to part of the inequity that we're seeing within the corporate workforce. How is Kanarys addressing this, and how would you respond to that?
So we absolutely think transparency is the key. One of the key fundamentals of our platform is how do we provide transparency in the data that not only companies need, but employees need, right? So that they can make decisions and understand which companies are really committed to these issues. But and companies to start really approaching this from a business perspective and having a strategy around it. Most organizations' strategy around DI is kind of what we talked about in the beginning, were the events. If they did any data, it would be around diversity. Nothing around equity or inclusion, or nothing around saying, are our policies fair? So things like, you'd be shocked at the limited number of companies that are even do pay equity analysis every year, right? A lot of times organizations are only doing these things when they're sued. So we have a proactive approach that we take with organizations to say, how do we holistically look at these things? But I think when we think about transparency in particular, that's key and critical, because we've seen so much movement from other countries when there's more transparency, right? When we look at some of the outcomes that we're seeing in Europe because of some of the pay equity information that they have to report. And that's why we've seen a lot of movement from California as well, right? With some of the initiatives that they've been doing recently, as far as board mandates and things along that lines, as well as trying to increase diversity, equity, inclusion. So I think transparency is important. It equips individuals with the information so that they can make better choices and decisions.
Okay, that's really good. Thank you for that. And thank you, Major, for chiming in. I've got a really hard question that's probably going to take us to the top of the hour, and I think we can both answer this one, Mandy. What advice would you give to young Mandy at UT right now, to your younger self? I know, I hate this question too. So I gave it to you first.
So when I think about young Mandy, I think young Mandy's a lot like Mandy now. And I would say the same about Kevin. But I would say to enjoy my time a little bit more. Just like I said, I'm grind all day. I was the same in college, as far as joining a million student organizations and kind of taking a little bit more time. But I don't regret anything that has happened in my journey, right? Even the negative things that have happened, because I do think it all equipped and framed my perspective of how to approach and tackle these issues. I think if I was, didn't have the challenges of being promoted to partner, or some of the difficult conversations that I had during my corporate, experience, that I wouldn't understand the way to really tackle these issues. And so the one thing I would tell young Mandy is have a little bit more fun. And that's when I talk with interns now. I tell them, have a little bit more fun, but I would keep the same kind of intensity. I think it's paid off well.
That's a really good answer, Mandy. In fact, I'm going to piggyback off of you with that one and kind of steal it. We are the same person, y'all, in case you haven't figured that out yet. But I would tell younger Kevin self to don't sweat the small stuff as much. And you need to, and be better at distinguishing what the small stuff is. Now, as Mandy said, I don't regret what I went through, and I don't regret those challenges where I was trying to sweat everything, because then I could kind of figure out what that small stuff is now. But just understand that, Kevin, it's not always what it appears to be that's offered up to me. I think that I spent a lot of my younger self just kind of lamenting the way that things were and are, and think that those are just going to be fact in the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. But no, Kevin can just be one person's opinion. At the very beginning of this, you talked about a racial incident that happened on campus. I want to just say one thing that happened with that. This was a racial incident that happened. You can Google it. It's a racial profiling thing that I was involved in over at Texas, and it was one of the highlights of my collegiate career.
Okay, Kevin, I just want to frame it a little bit, because I do think it's important people know that you were on campus, and a campus police officer questioned whether you were a student and demanded that you show ID. And so I think this goes to a lot of the things we talked about with the unconscious bias and having to prove you belong in spaces, right? In certain spaces. Right. So sorry, turning back over to you.
Well, no, thank you for saying that. I should have done that, but that's what actually happened. And it was pretty devastating for me, silently being devastated, just because I was so active on campus and I had given so much to the university, and I just felt personally insulted and attacked. But at the same time, it was because of my level of involvement and my activity on campus that I didn't have to succumb to some of the horrors that we see today of some people. For instance, after that incident, even after the guy had racial profiled me, he actually reported me to the dean of students to try to get me expelled from the university. And the dean of students remembers me because I was so active on campus that by the time I got up to her office, she said, I just called you up here because I wanted to hear your story, Kevin, but I've already dismissed this. And what I have asked the police department is, tell me why they were following you in the first place. That's what I want to know. Why were you following Kevin at all? Because that doesn't seem right. And that's the part that was left out of this police report. Mm-hmm. That wasn't clear. But my point in sharing this story is that it was such a tumultuous time for me. But I remember, and I was trying to go abroad at the time. I was trying to take so many classes. So I was doing 21 hours over at UT. It was a really bad decision, but I was doing that. And I was not doing well in my finance class. And I went into the finance class, Mandy, to go and talk to them, because I was getting a B-, which is insane for a BHPer, right? I was like, can you please help me with tutoring or something? I'm just going through a whole lot. And he says this to me. He says, well, Kevin, I know what's going on. Of course, I read the newspaper. And I was like, okay. And he said, well, let me tell you this. You don't prove a bigot wrong by starting this racial profiling campaign. You prove a bigot wrong by being smart and getting straight A's. And what I was left with, I was like, well, so am I giving my transcript and this is all going to go away? And also, aren't I a part of the BHP, which is pretty hard to get into? And also, he never called me stupid. He wasn't questioning that. So I think about that in the context of the younger self, Kevin. I spent so much time quietly wrestling with things like that and thinking it was about my worth. And I would tell younger Kevin, that's one person's opinion, and it doesn't define where you're going and what you are destined to go ahead and do. Don't sweat that type of stuff, because it happens all the time. It's a dime a dozen. Yes, it's hurtful. Yes, it's terrible, but that does not define where you are going to go in life. So with that, and it happens to everybody,
Mhm.
I know, but I felt like sometimes we just always feel that stuff just happens to us. And I just spent so much time, I didn't even tell my friends about this. I kept it to myself, wrestling with incidents like that. So I would spend less time obsessing about that and focus on my goals, like where I'm going in life. So with that, Mandisha, man, thank you so much, Mandy, for talking to me today. I feel
Well,
like this
thank
is
you. Thank
literally
you.
our first time y'all talking. Seriously, we talk about other stuff when we get together. So I think this is pretty cool to have a conversation with my BFF, literally my BFF, about what she's passionate about. So
Well, same to you, Kevin. And I think, so glad that people were able to participate in the panel today and that they enjoyed it. I'm seeing some good comments. And I think,
yeah,
the way you ended it is great, which is don't sweat the small stuff, and the grit and tenacity, right? When I think of
yeah.
entrepreneurship, I think of grit and tenacity. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah. Hook 'em, everybody. Texas, Texas. Bye, y'all.